Welcome to the TOEIC, TOEFL IBT Independent Writing Tasks, Day 3, Part 1. Our objectives for this video are to review the previous video discussing writing the thesis for our introduction. Then we will begin jumping into Part 3, writing the body, and discuss how to develop topic sentences. We will discuss an important test tip about signal and transition words, and then finish up with our activity called body building. To review about the thesis is the direct answer to the question in the topic. It is a statement that tells the reader what you're going to prove in the rest of the essay. If you recall, the thesis occurs at the end of the introduction. Generally, the beginning of the introduction is the part we call the hook, and the final part, the thesis, is generally the last thing the reader will see in the introduction. As we mentioned before, it's generally the last 1 to 2 sentences, and sometimes you could use more than one sentence to write the thesis. Of course, it helps provide direction and structure for the rest of the essay. It helps to tell the reader where they're going. What exactly are they going to see when they read your essay? And this, of course, will relate to the body. The thesis helps kind of direct us to the body and tells us in some kind of general way what things are we going to read about. So that's the key here, is to think about it needs to be general enough. We don't want to give away too much information in the thesis, and this is a problem sometimes. So again, don't be too specific with the thesis. It should be general enough to give the reader basically an idea of what's coming, but not include the reasons you're actually going to explain in the rest of the essay. I mean, after all, that is the purpose of the body. As we discussed in the previous video, in our recommended thesis patterns, the patterns that you can kind of generally follow when you write a thesis, notice how in each example words such as the reasons or explanations are used. So this way you're kind of giving a general word to provide some direction, and the reader will expect to say, well, probably there are going to be some reasons. Let's find out what they are. So notice in all of these examples, we tried to use language that wasn't specific so that the reader can kind of find out when they continue reading what those things are going to be. And again, notice in the comparison, we use words such as benefits or advantages or disadvantages. So again, using words that are non-specific helps to kind of give the reader some sort of expectation that they're going to learn something. So where are we in the writing process at this point? Well, in previous videos, we started talking about a very important stage, one that students often skip over, and that is the planning stage. And we discussed a couple of ideas to help get us thinking, concept mapping and other brainstorming ideas to help us kind of generate some reasons and examples before we actually begin to write. In the Day 2 videos, we discussed a lot about writing the introduction, and how to get readers to be interested in our introduction by using a hook, and of course developing the central argument for our essay called the thesis. So in this video, we're going to begin the process of writing the body. And again, the body is kind of the heart, kind of the middle. There are many different comparisons we could use to discuss, and you're going to see a couple in just a moment. But when it comes to discussing the body, on the TOEIC and TOEFL, if you recall, we said that the format of the essay is generally one called 2.4, and the 2 is referring to the fact that the body on the TOEIC or TOEFL contains at minimum 2 paragraphs, and each paragraph generally addresses the different reasons that you have thought about in your planning stage. So the idea here is that each paragraph in the body will show how it connects to the thesis, and by using a very important sentence. This sentence is called the topic sentence. Now, of course, this is not to be confused with just the essay topic, but a topic sentence is generally kind of the first sentence of each body paragraph. So notice what happens. When we focus on the body The body itself is made up of these two paragraphs, and each paragraph is going to begin with the topic sentence. The topic sentence is a way to kind of introduce us to the details and examples you're going to explain in the paragraph. Now, developing a topic sentence can often be very tricky. Part of the idea is we need to make sure it connects back to the thesis. Because think about it, each paragraph in the body is introducing us to the reason or argument. So in this case, we need to make sure that readers are pretty clear that what are they going to learn in each paragraph. So one way you can think about this, again, I use the idea that the body is kind of the heart, but another example we can think of is that the body is kind of like the backbone. And the topic sentence is a way to help connect the different parts of the essay together. So notice in this kind of visual example, imagine, for example, that this skeleton, this kind of body here is our entire essay. So think about the whole essay here. And that the top part of the essay is basically like the head. And this is our introduction. So think about it as like the head or the brains of the essay. And then the body is kind of representing that backbone. It's what kind of connects sort of the head to the conclusion that we're going to look at, later. So the body provides a very important structure to this particular essay. So again, think of the idea of a skeleton, how all of this information connects. Now, of course, the skeleton is just only part of this system. Another way to think about it is thinking about what's inside the backbone itself, what's being protected by it, and that's what we call the spinal cord. So I want you to think, for example, how the spinal cord, which again is kind of like the body, connects to the brain. The brain kind of gives us the signals and impulses to move our body around and basically kind of gives orders to the rest of the body. So in this way, think about it like that. And that the topic sentences, in a way, are kind of like the nerves that connect back to the thesis through this spinal cord. So hopefully this visualization can kind of help you a little bit to recognize that the topic sentences really kind of introduce us to the important ideas, but that they should always go back to connect to that most important part, which is the brain. Well, let's look at an example. Maybe this will also help to provide a clearer picture for you. Now, if you recall, in previous videos, we've used this topic before, and we're going to continue to use it. So some people prefer to play team sports, while others prefer to play individual sports. So in this particular visualization, now we're actually looking at some text. And so you can see that we kind of have a good start as to how the organization of the essay should be. So again, there's that introduction again. And notice I've highlighted the last part, which is the thesis. Well, again, notice how the thesis is going to connect to the topic sentences of the first paragraph in the body and in the second paragraph in the body. So now let's go ahead and begin with an introduction from this essay. When I was 16, I earned the starting guard spot on my high school basketball team. It was a wonderful experience, and I learned many life lessons. In this essay, I would like to explore these lessons and how they showed me that team sports have much more to teach than individual ones. So notice now when I begin the topic sentences of each paragraph, notice how I've tried to connect those topic sentences directly to the thesis. Well, first off, again, the last part here is the thesis, so we will leave this highlighted. Here comes our first topic sentence. The first lesson I learned was the value of teamwork. Okay, here comes the topic sentence for the next paragraph. The second lesson I learned was the value of humility. Now notice the word lesson. This is one way that I helped provide a stronger connection from my topic sentence to the thesis and the introduction. By using a general word like lessons and then using the singular form of the word in my first topic sentence, the first lesson, it provides a much clearer structure and a stronger connection to say, oh, wait a minute, I've seen this word before. It's connecting back to the thesis. So again, notice how we did it in the second paragraph as well. So what have we learned so far? Well, one way to think about topic sentences is they're sort of like mini introductions. They are going to introduce us to the argument we're going to read about. And this is something we'll talk more about in the next video. But notice they also show how each body paragraph is going to connect to the thesis. And by by way of this to the introduction as well. So one thing we need to make sure is that we can't just write a topic sentence without any thought. We've got to think about how can we include clear language that shows how the essay is organized. Well, of course, one thing we can do to help improve this organization is to use good signal words or transitional words. Again, the standard college essay, one of the most important things to think about is it does depend on a strong organizational style. So in addition to following just that format, following the 3.5 or on the TOEIC and TOEFL, that 2.4 format, it's also important to use good signal words and transition words. And of course, this is going to be true for all of the essay, but especially for connecting the body paragraphs together, and of course connecting the body paragraphs to the rest of the essay. So these types of words provide a better flow, and they help provide a clear sequence or logic to the reasons that we're giving. So in this case, notice the particular signal words that I used. The first lesson. So notice not only did I incorporate the word lesson, which was first mentioned in the thesis, but I also used the word first, which kind of naturally leads somebody to think that I'm going to talk about another one, which would be in this case the second. And you don't have to use the second lesson, but again, it helps to provide a stronger connection to the thesis and to each other, because they're a body, and we want to show how they work together as well. So notice many of the different signal or transition words that you will generally find on an essay task such as the TOEIC or TOEFL. Again, different signal words called sequence words, words that say things like first or second, next, and of course if you're finishing your idea you could say finally or in conclusion. You can use words that give kind of a change of direction, so words such as however. So if your next paragraph is going in a different direction, you might want to use a word like however or unlike the previous idea. Or if your paragraph is continuing the same idea, you could use words that are kind of continuation words. Words such as furthermore, or moreover, or in addition, or also. Perhaps the paragraph that comes next is somehow the effect of the cause mentioned in the paragraph before. So again, you might want to use words such as because or because of this. Perhaps your next paragraph is an example of something from the paragraph before. Maybe you're explaining something more in detail. You might want to use a word such as for example. And finally, if you're using the comparison and contrast essay types, again, you might want to use a word or a phrase such as on the other hand to help show the distinction between the two. Now, many of these types of ideas, you'll notice they all occur at the beginning of a sentence. Well, in writing, we kind of refer to these as introducers or introductory phrases. And they kind of help indicate how one paragraph is connecting to the paragraph before it. So it's typical in many cases to use a comma to separate these ideas, though it may not always be necessary to do so. So in my first example here where I say do, generally it's typical to put a comma after an adverb idea such as the word first. So first, comma, I learned the lesson of humility. But in my next example, this is the one I used in my example earlier, notice that the words the first lesson are actually the subject of the verb was. So in this case, we don't need a comma to separate them. We would just keep it one sentence. The first lesson I learned was, and so on. You can learn more about signal words or transitions by downloading the list of signals that you see at the bottom of this page. And I would highly recommend that you study them because, much like vocabulary, you need to know these words. You need to know how to use them, and of course you also need to recognize when you read them. Well, now it's going to be your turn. This activity, called bodybuilding, can be found at the link at the bottom of this page. When you're finished with this activity, go to the next video, Day 3, Part 2. Good luck!